Hello, everybody! Well, this is actually the first time I've ever done this. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Forgotten Table Tales. I am your Dungeon Master, Garson, and with me is my co-DM, Chitter Charmer.
Hello there.
And we are here to try something new, something I'm actually happy that we're given a chance to. We are going to be doing a relatively short but relatively informative look into all things tabletop RPGs, starting with the one thing that I think every DM needs to have. And Chitter, I think you'll agree with me on this. The monsters.
Yeah, yeah. Like, don't get me wrong, the Dungeon Master's Guide is great for running it all, but you need to actually have something to face. Otherwise, you're just pulling from the basic rules all the time, and you might as well just have that.
Exactly. There's only so many times that you can go rescue a little Timmy who fell down the well until you have to find something in that well. So we are relatively, I would say we're experienced DMs, Chitter. Would you say that we're experienced in that regard?
I mean, I know DMs that are more experienced than me, but I mean, sure, if we want to go with, I've done more than one campaign.
All right. But so by that logic, you obviously know that when it comes to the core part of Dungeons and Dragons, it's always the fights that have the monsters in the Monster Manual are so unique that we have decided that up until the release of the new Monster Manual, which I believe is supposed to come out in February, am I correct on that, Chitter?
Yes, I believe in February. If I remember correctly, it is supposed to be later towards February. I think like in the 20s. 1 second. Let me just verify that for you.
Well,
Nope, February 18th.
oh, so one day after my birthday is going to be the brand new Monster Manual. So we decided that since the Monster Manual, the current Monster Manual, has been around since 2014, we're going to go through all of them. We're just going to pick some of our favorite characters or favorite monsters, and we're just going to go and explain to you why we think they're cool, what they got going on, what they can do, and what stuff you can do as a DM with them. And that being said,
Yeah.
we got five each of our best characters that we decided on, and Chitter, we're going to start with you. And we're just going to go in no particular order.
Yeah, and just really quickly, for those who don't know about the 2014 Monster Manual, if you are to pull it up, you may find that it's lighter than most bestiaries released these days. And there's actually a particular reason for that. Around the time of the 2014 launch, WotC was in hot water. I mean, what else is new? For making the game too complicated, and people were actively calling it basically like a thesaurus with a game attached to it. So they basically had no choice but to scale it down. And this very first Monster Manual was basically just a greatest hits from 3.5e with a couple of 4e elements dashed in there, but mainly pulling back from 3 and 3.5e that were so popular.
So I'll level with you before we get started. I actually played very little of third edition, even less of 3.5. I actually started playing regularly around 4th edition, so I remember a lot about that time. And the one thing I remember more of anything is that they really tried to streamline a lot of different elements that just did not work. But I think the number one thing I remember more than anything else was those damn cards. Like, if you played 4th edition, you remember that they basically simplified stuff to like once a round, once a turn, and I believe once a day type of spells, and they just basically like really limited what you were able to do when it came to your character class. I think 5th edition now has really broadened it, and I think the bestiary was a great way of how they handled it. And I think and I just want, and one last thing is just I think 4th edition gets a bum rap because it's very on rails, But there were some things I wish they would bring back, like some of the classes that maybe one day we'll get into. Like, I do think there were a lot of really cool things. Like, for example, you could be like a pixie death guard, which, if you don't know, that's like an anti-paladin death wandering device in this form of a pixie.
Yeah, it's like, don't get me wrong, 4E definitely had its things that it had going for it, but it was no 3.5 and it needed to be. It needed that because it was bringing people over to that new system. And that's why a lot of the time when you see conversions, even conversion calculators today, it will often be a 3.5 to 5E calculator that is the default because so many people skipped 4E that it's ridiculous. It's kind of like, how do I put this?
The lost
You were,
the lost edition would be a good way I would describe it.
yeah, I would kind of actually describe it a little bit differently. Do you remember how things were with Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I do. For those of you who aren't aware, and yes, I am. I know we're supposed to be talking about the Monster Manual, but we're going to get to that. After the second generation, a lot of the Pokemon games, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, they ended up on the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance was not able to transfer the data from Game Boy Color cartridges, so a lot of Pokemon were lost to basically time. And then eventually they would release like Fire Red, Leaf Green, which brought in a lot of the mons that were missing. And so it kind of was like ever since the third edition, they brought it in. They made it so like I think after the third edition, they made it so they found a way to at least bring in as many Pokemon as they could. But for the first initial release, you were limited to what was in the Hoenn region, and you couldn't bring in some of your fan favorites. And that was what I think the best way to describe the fourth edition of Dungeons and Dragons is that it was trying to do something new, but it didn't have
And
the range to do a bunch of the stuff that people liked that they were used to.
yeah, not only that, but 3.5 was fading in interest, and a lot of people who grew up with it were kind of in that. I don't want to say high school mentality because they probably started playing in high school, but it was that clique mentality of I'm not a nerd. And then it took a lot of third party, not really promotions, but just kind of revivals and being like, oh, this is a nerdy activity that is on a lot of popular shows. I want to try it. But 4E was kind of in that lull between 3.5 with this beloved system with nerds of the 90s and the the 2010 to 2015 era of like Big Bang, Stranger Things, etc., which finally brought it back. And then Critical Role was like, here's what this show is. Here's what this game is. And it really felt like it didn't have the popularity or the tools to do what it needed to do.
I want to add just something really minor, and we can go into this in another episode, but I think the other thing is that around this time, you also saw the rise of other tabletop RPGs, but the one that always is compared to Dungeons and Dragons is Pathfinder. And I know a good chunk of
Yeah.
Pathfinder. We can talk. We're not going to get into that today because that's a whole other can of worms. I could do a whole episode on the fourth E Pathfinder fight, but my point is that Pathfinder was probably getting some more ground, and it really opened up the. I don't know if I'm saying the company right, Paisario, or I believe is how they pronounce the company name, or anyway,
Paizo or something like that?
I don't know. I'm probably gonna butcher it anyway. The point is that really opened up that company, and then they also went into making drive-through TRT TTRG drive-through, and a lot of conversion modules were sent through it because they had that name recognition afterwards. And Wizards was in a bit of a low point, but let's get back on topic. We're not here to talk about 4th edition. We're not here to talk about 3.5, and we're certainly not here to talk about Pathfinder. We're here to talk about the 2014 revamped Monster Manual that, in my opinion, still has one of the best fucking cover arts ever. And I'm talking about the one with the beholder trying to eat people on the ship. That is still one of the most fun moments I had looking at it. I'm literally holding it in my hands right now, the physical hard copy of the Monster Manual from 2014. So let's get into our main topic tonight, and that is five of the more interesting villains or enemies that you can fight. Chitter, we're gonna start with you. And I didn't put these in a particular order. I just went with the one that I just went in order from. I pulled them up. So we're gonna start with your first one, and that is the fairy dragon. Chitter, what can you tell me about the fairy dragon?
Okay, so the fairy dragon is one of my favorites that kind of gets forgotten because its DC is relatively on the lower side, with its younger version being just a challenge rating 1 and its older version being a challenge rating 2. And it is a tiny creature, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, it should be your first introduction into dragons as a whole. Because these dragons are, I don't want to say that they are powerful per se, but they're annoying.
So
one of my favorite things.
So mind if I ask a quick question? Mind if I ask a quick question real quick?
Yes.
What do you mean by they're annoying? Can you go into more detail on that?
Absolutely. Basically, the very first thing is based on their color. As the dragon ages and changes colors, it gains additional spells. So just because you manage to run into a red fairy dragon at one point doesn't mean you'll have the same situations come up with one that's like an indigo or a violet or a green. They all have different spells.
We actually have that list pulled up right now as well. So I do see what you're talking about. Like, for example, the reds ones seem to just have more cantrips, but then the violet one has access to the polymorph spell, which, if you don't know, which obviously you know what that is one of the more broken spells in all of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. The biggest one, though, that seems to play into what it is actually the indigo one. The violet one just seems to be a power buff, really, which is ironic. But the hallucinatory territory terrain is scary because it can make anything within 150 feet look like other natural terrain. As it says in the spell description, open fields or a road can be made to resemble a swamp, a crevasse, a hill, or some other difficult or impassable terrain. A pond can be made to seem like a grassy meadow, a precipice like a gentle slope, or a rock-strewn gully like a wide and smooth road. It plays into this idea that it's a fae, but it has its own environment that it can mess with. And going further down on the page, which we don't have, but it does include it in the actual monster side when you're actually creating it, is you find something very interesting that you don't normally find at CR1 and 2. You find personality traits, you find ideals, you find adventure hooks. This is something that you don't get into for most creatures until the high CR 15, 20s, etc. This is a creature who, if you wanted to, could turn into a character hook, could turn into a first big bad, or a reoccurring character that grows with the party and just drives them insane, or even just guides them in the chaotic, silly way, because it is both a fae, but it is also a dragon, and dragons are known for their ability to just guide storylines. Even the movie was about a dragon. So imagine saying you have a guide as a dragon and it's a fairy dragon that you could fight if you wanted to and recently come out on top, but you have to choose not to and be guided by it because you choose to. And that is such an interesting way to both tackle like normal party issues, but also maybe force those more chaotic players to reel it in a little bit and not hit everything that they see.
And if I may add on to that, just from what I've read, one of the things I absolutely do like about this creature as well is if you look at the stats, it's got really good stats for a challenge rating 2 creature. Like, its only bad stat is strength, but again, it's not meant to be a frontline fighter. We got dozens of monsters that automatically do that. I even included like some in my list that are more like that, but it's got a 20 in dex, which means it's very nimble and can move around pretty well. It's definitely got a +3 in charisma, and for some of the spells that it has, like for example, suggestion and even minor illusion, charisma. I think at least minor illusion falls under charisma. Nope, it does not. But the thing is, it also has invisibility. So when you take all of that into consideration, it may be a challenge rating 2, but even if it only has like the base minimum hit points of about 14, it's still going to be a tough fight, especially for like low level characters. Like, you could probably fight maybe 3 of these at once around level 4, and there's a good chance that depending on what color you make them, they could be a legitimate threat to any early game party as well. And not only that, they got dark vision, they got good stealth, and they might be able to even get a crit or a sneak attack crit just because of how high their stats are. And I think that's actually a pretty good thing to have. The one thing I want to ask something about is, could you tell me some more about the Euphoria Breath ability?
The Euphoria Breath I kind of find really interesting because, yes, the DC Wisdom saving throw is like really low, but that's kind of the thing with dragons of this size. It's not meant to be super strong, but it's meant to catch you in a moment of narrative lull where you aren't paying full attention to things. Because wisdom does tend to include stats like perception, insight, etc.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to catch you off guard. So if if you fail that save, you're kind of boned, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, I
Because
bet.
then you basically you are exceedingly happy, but you have to roll a d6. And if you roll a 1 to 4, which is like 66.7% of the die, you just have to move in a random direction. You have to like roll like another d6 to determine what direction you're going in and use all of your movement in that random direction. You have no control over where you're going. And then on a 5 and 6, all you get to do is have the honor of making another wisdom saving throw. So potentially this could introduce party members who don't how do I put this? Don't do well with groups, like to learn how to be good with groups. Because if your character's low with wisdom, so say like you're a barbarian and I'm going to charge in, wisdom is my lowest stat for a reason because everything else took priority.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't go charging in on this thing, at least not without extra help, because I'm going to be caught off guard and I'm going to be dancing around until I fall on my ass.
Yeah, I think that would
So
be the.
again,
I think you're absolutely right on that too. I think that's probably the best way to describe
yeah,
it.
yeah. This is what I mean by this creature is very much a tutorial in how to deal with bosses. This creature not only has that, but I did want to bring something up because this is really interesting.
Go for it. What do you want to talk about? Talk about with it.
Younger fairy dragons cannot have lair actions, but older ones, the ones that have more spells, more vibrant rainbow colors, it even says in the monster manual you can give it like these lair actions between chaotic aura or grasping plants, which are two very different effects, and you can give them it on initiative count 20, teaching your party about lair actions with a creature that isn't overly powerful to the point where those two words will make them start running for the hills. But
You,
it will make them respect them.
you know, I actually am kind of amazed by that, because you wouldn't expect something in the game called Dungeons and Dragons, because dragons have usually been the end game big bad guys. Like, whole campaigns can be written about some of the primary dragon colors, but to have a level 2 that not only has lair actions, but just reading the one for chaotic aura, that honestly means that it could potentially be a good low level big bad guy that is a threat. And of course, difficult terrain, we all know, is the bane of all low level parties, because they just don't have access to their mobility. They don't have access to anything past maybe a first level spell like Misty Step, or maybe land climb, or any of that. But are you gonna waste it on difficult terrain? You're gonna waste it for the terrain area, or are you gonna want to save it to battle the boss? These are questions you have to ask yourself.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. And also, it not only comes with that, but it also comes with regional effects that can teach a party to be aware of terrain, and not just in like the difficulty of it. It has compulsory offering, where if you get within a mile of its lair, you have to succeed on a DC 15 wisdom saving throw, or you feel compelled to leave an offering worth at least 5 gold stashed in an out-of-the-way place. You can only be affected once by this compulsion, but that's a significant chunk for a low-level party. 5 gold? Are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm. That's like at least 3 health potions right off the bat.
Yeah. And then there's also time, where time is fluid within 1 mile of the fairy dragon's lair, flowing somewhere between half and twice its normal speed. And sapient creatures that spend a year within 5 miles of the lair feel the persistent urge to play pranks on one another. That's a story hook. Why are all these people who suddenly move into the city such pranksters? Why are people who take a walk into the forest feeling this need to give a gift to something that they've never seen? Why are people aging slower? Why are people aging faster? Those are classic story hooks, and a storyline that pushes you in a direction while using the end goal of being a dragon. And then you go from there, because there's no way you're done with a CR2 monster. If you're done with that, that's a one shot. But if you keep going with it, then you can say, we've taken on a dragon. What else is there?
Well, I will say this. The fairy dragon is definitely a lot more interesting than I thought it would be when you brought up the idea. I didn't even know about the lair or the regional effects, let alone the fact that it could have lair effects. So to me, that was automatically something that I think I might even write. If I ever did have a one-shot, maybe this would be a good early game, low-level campaign, big bad guy, and I think they would be happy to fight something like this and then feel accomplished. So I think that's a good start to this, to a good start to the list. Is definitely so I will give the fairy dragon, if I'm gonna rate this thing, I'm gonna give it 4 flumps out of 5.
Wait a minute, hang on.
What? It's
4 flumps? Are you?
Yeah, 4 flumps out of 5. Okay, and the reason why it doesn't get the 5th flump is because that is reserved for only one creature, and that is the flump itself. It is the flumpiest of all flumps. Anyway. Anyway, moving on to my number 5. So I wanted to go with something a little bit different. For me personally, when I write a campaign, I love demonic creatures, like crazy looking monsters. So most of the monsters I picked were definitely something that you would not want to run into at night. So for my number 5, I wanted to go with something a little bit normal, but a little bit creepy, and we're gonna start with the Yokl. I can still never pronounce this right. So, The Yokel is, in my opinion, these things are not meant to be like the big bad guy, but they are meant to be like an opposing threat. So, Chitter, let me ask you this. If you were to fight in the Abyss, or you,
I'm already screwed if I'm there, but go on.
well, fortunately, that's not where these things are. So these things are essentially, they're fiends, they're shape changers, so they can take on a lot of different, like, hiding forms. But the main thing to know about these guys is one key aspect, and that is that they are a servant of one of the most famous, I would say, villains of the D&D universe, and that would be Loth, the Drider Queen.
So, why does that not surprise me?
Fair enough. But these things are honestly legitimately a big threat. So let's just start with the main thing that these guys are known for. These are shape changers. They primarily transform to either like drow, giant spiders, but you're not going to know what you're going to be fighting automatically. And I think that's a good thing to have, because the fact that they can take on a humanoid form, such as like a drow, means you can use these guys to be like the secret bad guy in a town where they're trying to lead you to the lair, and then it turns out they were going to betray you the whole time. The other thing I like about these things is that they don't look threatening at all in the photo. They look like a gooey tree. But that's actually a benefit, in my opinion, because if you have an unassuming monster, regardless of what it can be, no party is ever going to take it seriously. And that is a benefit that I think all DMs need to have at one point or another, is that they need to have something that they can point to and make it a threat, but no one takes it as a threat right off the bat. And for me, that's what this creature is that it is an unassuming threat that all parties at higher levels are going to look at and go, oh, we can totally take that. We took down, like, necromancers, we maybe took down a young dragon or so, but this guy is like, we're not going to give it our all, and he can definitely attack you, because first and foremost, this thing is resistant to almost every form of attack. It's resistant to bludgeoning,
fire, light.
Yeah, cold, fire, lightning, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing. It's immune to poison, so you can't poison it. It's got dark vision to 120 feet, so if it's in like a cave or something, this thing can see you before you can see it. And what makes it even better is that this thing can climb on walls. So,
and I'm even noticing that innately it can do once a day dominate person. Like, that's a powerful spell to be giving any creature, let alone one that a level 10 party's going up against.
Right, but see, that's the other thing, is that you don't fight this as just a one-off enemy either. These things work so well in groups of packs of like 3, maybe 4 at most if your party can handle it, but 3 is kind of like the magic number where you can spread them out over the map, and one of them's moving, one of them's standing still, and one of them's trying to dominate the person, and then each one's like moving around, and by the time you realize what you're dealing with something that can have like 136 hit points and a 15 armor class that can not only dominate you, but it can also turn into mist to avoid the attacks. These things, in my opinion, don't seem that threatening, but that's what I love about it. These are these things are dangerous. So can I just read you some of the stuff that it can do?
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
So, first and foremost, we already established this thing has resistance to like all forms of the most common damage. But not only that, it has magical resistance. So it's got advantage on saving throws, which is going to shut down a lot of spellcasters. It has high armor class, so barbarians are going to probably be the best fight you're going to have with it, but then, turns into toxic mist, and then poisons the party. I've had a campaign I was in where we were walking in a dark cave. We were led there by a drow, and this is kind of why I love this thing. And we got to the center of the cave, and in the middle of it, it looks like one giant domed rock with the one sunbeam coming down on this thing. and we thought it was a tree because no one passed the perception check to see what it was. We went down another hallway, and when we came back, the tree was gone. And it was doing everything in its, and the DM was doing everything in its power, like, okay, what's going on? Where is it? Because it was it was in spider form, was climbing up the walls, laying a web. When we came back the third time, the room was covered in webs, the tree was back, and it was just like impossible to get to this thing. And I loved it. It was like one of the most fun campaigns I had in a long time with this thing.
I can imagine that would be, you just feel this growing form of dread from something that you didn't take seriously, and you don't suspect that it came from it, and then you realize, oh, maybe I should have taken this thing seriously.
Exactly. And I always say this when it comes to to reading the Monster Manual, and this is a good rule of thumb for all new DMs. If you look at a monster immediately and it looks silly, the party members are all going to think it's silly. And if it's, and much like the fairy dragon, just because something doesn't look threatening, you can use it for great advantage, and especially when you're trying to install dread into your campaign team. So I'm happy about that. The Yakel, in my opinion, is, it may not be the most threatening enemy, but it can definitely build the most tension just because of what its kit is. And obviously, I have to also point out is, like, I mean, it's Loth. Like, what do you want me to say? Like, everyone knows Loth, the Drow. The Drow Spider Queen.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway,
I mean, what?
there is one thing, and this is kind of important. The Yakel does not look like this outside of the deep web. So, like, if you are running a campaign and you have it, and you're not going into, like, Loth's realm, it's not going to look like this. It will take on the form of a female Drow. So, not only that, you could also, and I'm not saying you should do this, but you could always set up a romance subplot where one of the party members may fall for one of these things. You know,
Look, if you have a bard that wants to seduce everything that moves, and or a character who likes to get attached to one specific thing, and you just want to absolutely break their heart, go for it.
exactly.
I haven't had my heart broken by something like that. No.
Well, like I said, the Yakel, in my opinion, is a fun little creature. I'm gonna give it 3.5 flumps out of 5. Fun creature, great campaign setting, and definitely could be a threat, but not the most. But it does its one thing well. But could, if it had a little bit more, variety, I think it would definitely get bumped up to a 4. But for what it's worth, it's very good at what it does.
Yeah.
Okay, so Chitter, yours is up next, and this one, I really need you to explain this to me because we were looking over this together, and I didn't really understand it, and I still don't get it. So for the next one we have is the Lamia.
Now this one is fascinating, because when you pull it up, you're like, wait a minute, that's not a Lamia, that's like a Sphinx type thing.
I was thinking that, yes.
But that's the thing, is a Lamia hierarchy exists. And I'm going to get into that once I explain what a Lamia is. Basically, they're decadent monsters that have been forgotten and make ruined desert cities and tombs of forgotten monarchs or pharaohs their home of their rule, basically. They surround themselves with sycophants. So it's basically a kingdom of pleasure. They're very vain. They're very demonic. They're very monstrous. They are minions of Gratz, a demon lord. And he created Lamias from his own mortal servants, granting them immortality in return for monstrous powers and promising not to stab him in the back.
Did they stab him in the back?
Sadly, no.
Okay.
Mainly because they are so evil that they see it as a good thing. But here's where it gets kind of interesting, is that most of the Lamia that you see are actually not Lamia that that you know and think of. Because when you think of Lamias, you think of the half snake, half human. But in Dungeons and Dragons, that's a noble Lamia. A noble Lamia contains more knowledge of history and arcane magic, collecting treasures. It's basically like a how do I say this? It's basically like the upper level of a Lamia, where the lower Lamias, the more prevalent Lamias, are the Leonin monstrosities. Where basically, if you work hard enough, you or gather enough gold and treasure and history, you can prove yourself to the Demon Lord and take on this serpentine like form that everyone sees as this super powerful thing. Whereas if you're stuck in a Leonin form, you're seen as lesser. You're seen as not as powerful. Now, the thing is that it's very rare, even more rare than just a noble itself, to see a male noble. Because to females in their society, men are kind of seen as worthless. That is not just me saying that. Even from the histories and the like the tombs of Lamias, they have a very matriarchal society, believing males were good for nothing more than breeding and slave labor. So for a male to not only gain any power whatsoever to prove his worth, but to become a serpentine form shows an excess beyond what most nobles would have had to have gone through had they been female. Basically, it's the exact opposite of like the worst kinds of societies that we see. It's the exact opposite, basically.
So if I understand what you're saying, then oh, hi Neko. So let me get this straight. If I understand exactly what you're saying, the Lamias that we see in like traditional media would be like uh, uh I'm trying to phrase this right because I want to make sure I get this right. You're saying that the Lamia, or whatever turns into the Lamia, they are immediately like they take on a different idea of what power is when they become a Lamia. Then, so it's basically like a total mind rewrite. Then, because if what you're saying is true, then they immediately get this notion that males are not worth it anymore after they become these creatures. Am I correct in assuming that?
It's basically just the society that they have. I wouldn't say that it's more a rewrite of their mind, more a rewrite of their expectations.
So let me ask you this as a story beat. Let's say you had a village, and in this village, like you go in there at one point, everything's normal. There's no like, there's it's like a standard village. Everyone's working together. Peace be upon it. Let's say that let's say something happens and the villagers all turn into Lamia. Would they then adopt that mindset afterwards, or would they become like still have their minds from before?
It would really depend based on how they were transformed. But I will say this, it really would come down to both how close this village or community was to other Lamias, whether this was a rogue one or a community like kind of integrating this village into their own. Because if they didn't have it, they basically could keep roughly about the same thing, but become more hedonistic, become more obsessed with power. Maybe they might become more matriarchal, but that would take a lot of time unless they were integrated directly, and then it would be more of expectations and survival.
Hmm. That is an interesting take on it. And on top of that, I think it's kind of interesting that they have this mindset. But um, not only that, I think you could have like an entire like just campaign story arc about just the transformation aspect of the Lamia, because I think that's not only an interesting story beat, but it allows people to like have a connection to someone beforehand, and then you might have to like God's willing, you have to put them down too, because if what you're saying, Lamias do start as regular individuals. They aren't born into this unless I'm reading that wrong, in which case I might be, but everything you said, they don't really seem like that.
No, they're more created from mortal servants of a demon lord. So that could be an interesting thing, like where your character has this romantic interest who's always had this secret that they've never told you about, and then suddenly they're a Lamia and you realize exactly what that secret was.
Well, on top of that, they also seem to be able to use magic too, so that's another cool thing I like. What is the?
Actually, some
Oh yeah, go ahead.
sorry,
No, go.
just something that's really interesting within the Lamia like society. Basically, you're right that they can use magic, but males fight with curved swords and magic, while females only used magic.
Hmm, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's another way of basically the best way that I can describe it is that their very body is showing this mindset. And now, of course, at first glance, you may be going, what are you talking about? Because there's nothing in their body that seems to suggest uh, why that would make any difference. But think about it this way. You have a Leonin body to start out with and you're lesser, right?
Right.
Then you go to a serpentine body. That is not seen by many people to be a strength upgrade. That is a tactical and mental upgrade. That is thinking on a different angle than just pure strength alone.
Hmm. Well, that actually does raise a good point. Um, Before we go on to the next part of this, there's been one thing on this list that I've been looking at, and I need you to explain this to me. What is the Geese spell? Because that just seems like because I know most of the other spells. This one just seems like it's unique to the Lamia, just from what I'm reading. And could you give me more
No,
information? What do you mean no?
the Geese spell is a DM's masterpiece of seduction.
You're gonna have to
Because not
elaborate.
only is okay, this is a 5th level spell that is a story spell or a player character spell that basically forms a story in itself. You place you place a magical command on a creature and you basically force it to do a service or refrain from some action or course of activity as you decide. If it can understand you, it must make a wisdom saving throw or become charmed by you for 30 days. while it is charmed by you, if it acts in a manner directly counter to your instructions once a day, it takes 5d10 psychic damage each time. You can issue any command you want, short of an activity that would result in certain death, but only remove curse at 5th level or above. Greater Restoration or Wish can end it. And if you cast it higher at like 7th or 8th, the duration is a year.
Oh
and when
my
you cast it
god,
at 9th,
no.
you have it until it is gone by remove curse at level 9, Greater Restoration, or Wish.
Jesus Christ. Okay,
It
that
is-
sounds broken.
This is not a spell to be used lightly. This is a spell to throw in the absolute perfect sleeper agent. Like, imagine this, okay?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Your party's walking along on this magic quest, and they come across this knight who has been damaged and brutalized, claiming to be wanting to fight the same enemy as them. You form this bond over months of party bonding, many sessions, forming a bond with your NPC ally who you come to know as this fallen hero who's trying so desperately to reclaim something of theirs. And then you finally all meet with your mutual enemy. And then you all go, "We will fight together as one." And then she just chuckles and says, No, you're not all going to fight together. Aren't we? You wouldn't go against me. And you realize that he cannot fight her or he will die.
Oh, Jesus. Oh.
Because the psychic damage is too much. And you realize you can't break this spell in time. So you either have to fight against your best friend or leave him to suffer at the hands of his worst enemy. And there's nothing you can do.
Well, shit.
That is a storyline right there, and the party getting revenge, figuring out a way to counter this spell that controls him so deeply. It's a charm, but it's so much deeper and it lasts so much longer, and he can't resist. How do you do it? With one spell, you just set up a campaign.
Well, okay. I'm going to give my rating now on the Lamia. It's going to get a 4.5 flumps out of 5 because clearly, I'll be honest, that extra half is just coming from the Geese spell, but the way you describe it, that not only could be a campaign starter, it could be a campaign breaker. So having that power there is really good. I gotta admit, even if you have a DC saving throw, if it's a charisma is one of those stats where if you're not a warlock or a bard, you really don't think much about it. Unfortunately.
To be fair, it is wisdom. But also, to be fair,
no, it says here that it's charisma.
Okay, cool. I must have made a mistake then, but yeah. But the interesting thing, and here's where it gets even more interesting, is that it's available for bards, clerics, druids, paladins, wizards, and specifically Oath of the Crown.
Oath of the Crown paladins.
Specifically, they get it automatically.
You know, I think they're actually going to be the new sub race in Baldur's Gate 3, so we're going to see if they added that if they add this spell into that too. That would be amazing. Okay, so we're going to move on to my number 4. So Chitter, I talked about this briefly with you a little bit. This is not going to be the most flashy creature, but I love it to death. for one simple reason, and that is because it is versatile. And we're going to be talking about the Helmed Horror. So,
Oh, I remember you mentioning this. Yes.
exactly. So, let's just start with the basics. The Helmed Horror is essentially a construct enemy. It's basically a living suit of armor, and we've had a lot of enemies that are like this. A lot of constructs kind of fall under the create a robot type of deal. But that's not why I like this monster. I like this monster because it's a living suit of armor. And you can make that such a unique enemy to fit your motifs, but have the stat block still be a challenging fight. So, if you look at the screen right now, this is the suit of armor they have in the DM guide, and it looks like an endgame boss, doesn't it? But what I like about this is that just using your imagination, you can make this thing into so many more interesting concepts. For example, as I was telling Chitter, you can make the armor, you can make it like a samurai armor and have it like, instead of having no face, that you can have its like protective face guard act like a face, and like as a face with the red eyes. You can change the color to blue, have it envelop a paladin suit of armor. Now you have an angelic helmed horror. And it's neutral, so it's not going to break it. You can have it be like a living suit of angelic armor, or you can make it like really like a dark knight. You can have it like have even darker stuff, and you can make the colors feel vibrant. You can describe the armor. This is something I like to call a dungeon master's paintbrush monster, and it's a term I use. To describe all types of creatures that are unique in the fact that they are they allow you to create creatures so interesting just by using your imagination. But they still feel like they not only feel like they're a threat, they feel like they're going to be able to help you be paint a bad guy's lair with them. And they're also interesting because they also have a unique spell immunity. I didn't talk about this yesterday, but one thing I love about it is that these things can be immune to any 3 spells. Not spell classes, any 3 spells. And they give you some examples. They can be immune to Fireball, Heat Metal, and Lightning Bolt. But depending on what your party is using a lot, you can make these guys legitimate threats by just giving them stuff like, I'm now immune to something like Frostbolt, or I'm immune to Tasha's Hideous Laughter, or I'm immune to stuff like that. Obviously, they also have immunities to certain conditions, mind you. But the fact that you can make them go like, hey, he's immune to your best spell, now deal with this guy. Or he's immune to a cantrip use a lot, try doing this. Or, hey, he's immune to this corner case spell that might have broken you, like Command. And we all know where that's coming from. And then they also have, like, the traditional magic resistances. But that's kind of what I love about them, is that because you can make them so unique based on just your own imagination, that they are allowing you to create such a unique creature, that it's honestly just so interesting. And another thing is that it's still kind of like a lesser suit of animated armor, but it does have also intelligence, so it can think. It's got pretty good stats. It doesn't have a bad stat in the block. And not only that, it's just like, you could have like an entire like layer of these guys. Just have them look like regular suits of armor. The bad guy wakes them up. Now they're fighting you. What do? And they can be a legit threat, especially because there's nothing that says they have to be immune to the same 3 spells. So if you had 4 of them, you could have 1 of them be immune to 3 spells from a particular sorcerer. You could have them be 3. You could have another one have 3 spells that's immune to a druid. You could have another 3 of them that are immune to like maybe what the wizard's casting, and then 3 to what the paladin is casting. So now you have a challenge, and it allows the party to have to think on their feet, because now these guys are going to be legitimate threats that are counteracting the best stuff that you have, but you don't know that until you start fighting them. So that's kind of what I like about that, is that these guys are so... They are not only unique in the fact that they allow you to be so creative, but you have so much free reign with them. It's just kind of awesome to have. And I feel like it's also a little bit better than the suit of than the animated armor, because you don't get like there. Well, it's just like,
if I may,
yes.
there's also another part that makes them so much better than animated armor, and it specifically mentions it within the monster page itself. Is you mentioned its stats were good enough to think. It's intelligent enough to understand the difference between an order's intent and its exact wording. You cannot play wordplay with this thing.
Exactly. And it's not only that, it's tactically cunning. It's got great stats. It doesn't need air, food, or drink, so it allows you to set it up in spaces that you normally wouldn't have to worry about other living monsters. The fact is that you have the only limit to this type of creature is your imagination, and there is nothing wrong with that. That is a beautiful thing where you, as a DM, are allowed to construct these creatures to not only fit your campaign, but make it so they are memorable too, and that is something I love.
And
Sorry.
actually, the Book of Many Things actually came out with a variant for it.
Did?
It's called the Helm. It's called the Helm-Tor Detention Drone. Now, it roughly is about the same: spell immunity, pick 3 spells, magic resistance, cunning, thinking, yada yada yada. But there's one piece that I think would pump it up to more a CR5 or a CR6, actually.
Okay, what's that?
And it's its detention orb. And as per the description, it launches a tiny orb of magical force at a creature it can see within 30 feet of itself. Either the creature makes the DC 15 con save, or it is encased in the orb, which is just large enough to contain the creature. While encased, the creature doesn't need to breathe, eat, or drink, and it doesn't age. Nothing can pass through it, nor can any creature teleport or use planar travel to enter or exit the orb. As a bonus action, the drone can just move it up to 30 feet in any direction it wants. It needs a successful casting of Dispel Magic, DC 15, or it remains intact until the drone actively ends the effect or the drone is destroyed. It can only have one of those active at a time, but if it creates a detention orb while it already has one active, the first orb disappears, freeing the creature inside. But that is something where you're like, oh crap, we need to figure out which one we can actually hit with our specific abilities. And oh shit, there goes Johnny. He's now trapped and completely useless.
Exactly. Okay, I didn't know about the detention orb, but that actually does help. I don't consider that... I just consider that like a small Dungeon Master flavor added that you can have, but the fact is that either way, like, these things are just awesome. And not only that, they also are immune to some of the most annoying, like, combat tricks that a lot of people can pull off. For example, you can't blind them, you can't charm them, you can't deafen them, you can't frighten them, you can't paralyze them, you can't petrify them, poison them, or stun them, and they are immune to force, necrotic, and poison damage. So, like, honestly, I would say if you could you could have a party of like maybe fifth level adventurers go against 4 of these things as a final dungeon fight, and just like
yeah.
Not only that, they would be fun because they don't have that much HP in terms of like other big bad guys. They only have like 60. They do have an armor class of 20 though, which I think I would probably bump that down to an 18 if I wanted to do low level stuff. I'm just going off of, I know I'm reading like the stat block a lot, but like just ideas. Yeah. But like the point is that at the end of the day, you make this creature what you want. You are not tied down to anything, and that is why it gets a Dungeon Master Paintbrush Award as a badass creature. I love this thing. I want to include it in our campaign, but maybe it'll come in a little later. Point is, love this guy. I'm gonna give it 4.5 flumps out of 5.
And before we move on, it's funny that you had mentioned like the whole like spell blocking thing, because I actually came up with this really, really cool story hook for another campaign idea that we had, and it would involve like level 5 characters. eventually getting to this point. Do you remember the Wild Beyond the Witchlight book?
No.
The like the Feywild book. Well, basically, you have to run in eventually at some point and meet Tasha, or at least like run in and go into one of her like labs or hideouts. Now imagine walking in and you're so used to casting like hideous laughter or any spell that's like Tasha's whatever. And imagine a helmed horror being resistant to it with an echoing female voice going, "You thought you could use my own magic against me. That's adorable."
That.
And then you have to sit,
No, I'm
and you
thinking
just
about
have
it.
to sit there and think to yourself, is this Tasha?
That is a scary thought, and that's a really good point. And the best part I love about this is that, like I said, that's just one spell it's immune to. You don't even know what, like, you could pick two more, and you would still have like a legitimate threat with this thing. I think it's Chef's Kiss, a great low-level monster that is just fun to fight with. Now,
Absolutely.
okay, so moving on, we're gonna go to your next one, Chitter, and this one you're gonna have to like I understand, but I don't understand. We're gonna be talking about the Naga next. The Naga are quite honestly one of the more unique picks on this list because there's actually 3 versions of it that we could find. But why don't you just start by explaining why you like the Naga so much?
The Nagas I found really interesting because this is this is a race that I not only consider it to be the rivalry that it has with the Yuan Ti, but I also find it to be the classic, like, basically the counterpart, the Zangoose to the Seviper of the noble Lamias.
I would consider this more like a Seviper because it's snake-like, but I get what you're saying.
Exactly. And here's why I think that. Because the first Nagas were created as immortal guardians by a humanoid race lost to history. So they are on the exact opposite side from a Lamia. They are exactly opposite. One is going into these treasure and lore-filled places to rule it as a hedonistic wildlife, while a Naga is just going in there to rule it as a proper, like, dynasty and dictatorship. And it's really interesting to think of because Nagas are like they're lawful good, which is the complete opposite of what Lamias are, that are chaotic evil. They don't even seek out violence. They only if their foes persist do they actually attack, which is just wild to me.
The other thing sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just gonna say one quick thing.
No.
This is very different to what most Nagas are because, for starters, they don't have arms, which I would think is something like which I do think is a bit different because a lot of the time in mythology, Nagas have like reptilian bodies, obviously, but then but they at least have like human-like torsos. This one kind of looks like an old grandpa snake, if I'm being honest, which I kind of like.
Yeah, it's so cool because, like, if you look at it, the 3 types of Nagas that we have, there's the Bone Naga, which is formed from the rivalry between Yuan Ti and the Nagas, and just basically said, nah, you ain't coming back to life, you're serving me. Which is just like, oh, okay, that's an interesting twist. But then there's the Spirit Naga, which I could see being like the fallen guardian Naga that has been fighting Lamias for decades because it lives in gloom and spitefulness, constantly plotting vengeance against creatures that have wronged them or that they just believe to have wronged them. And it likes to charm its foes, drawing them close so they can sink its fangs right in. And they enslave the mortals around them, basically becoming the enemy that they wish to fight against so much. It's like a serpentine form of Zariel, and I just love that so much because the saying, if you stare into the void stares back, is so powerful with this. Because you can either have a guardian Naga that is pure and speaks celestial and is just like overall this amazing being, or you can have it fall eventually to a Spirit Naga where it loses some of its power. It's gone down from a challenge rating 10 to a challenge rating 8. And it loses some spells, and it loses its sense of good and serene, charming and attacking. And it's just, this could be a storyline where this desert worshipped this Naga for millennia, and they realize that it's fallen, and they're asking these powerful warriors to put their goddess to sleep so that they can finally heal her and bring her back to her true self, or at least let her rest in the rest that she deserves.
Not only that, and I think it's kind of interesting when you think about this, is that because there are 3 different variations of it, you not only have, like, the Bone Nagas, you can obviously make, like, they're skeletons, they're undead, they aren't, like, super dangerous. They do retain some of their magic essence, but they do feel like the bones of someone that just can't pass on. And the Guardian Nagas, they honestly feel like they could be the wise mentor role, and they fit that. And not only that, even though they are monstrosities, they are lawful good, so hell, you could even have them be like, maybe, and this is just me suggesting this here, you could have an order of paladins that are trained by Nagas. Like the Guardian Nagas. They like okay, to use a like a story beat from another outside perspective, in Magic the Gathering there's a plane called Tarkir. There used to be one of the tribes is the Dramoka tribe, and they are like all one big family, and they worship this dragon Dramoka. I could kind of see that be a story element with these guys, where they're like druids of the scale, and their leader is not like a priest or anything, or even like a silver dragon. It's a Naga, but this Naga has been like, it's like so wise, and maybe even teaches them how to use some of their magic, and it feels like they're a protective deity. So, and that could be a big twist because, well, obviously, if you hear Naga, I think 9 times out of 10 you're going to think the bad one's the Spirit Naga. But it's that you can't judge something by its cover, and I like that idea. And so that's kind of cool, just from a story perspective.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, and it's one word. It is one word that makes this absolutely beyond beautiful. They say the beautiful Guardian Nagas. When D&D goes out of its way to describe a creature as beautiful, you know to the characters that this is majestic.
I can't argue with that. I mean, this one right here looks a little like it looks good, but beauty can be like, if you look at cobra snakes, they have like unique patterns on them. And you could easily describe it as something like with a unique pattern. It's got like maybe a jeweled hood. It could even be like a lotus cobra, like one that has multiple different scales that are different colors. And they don't, and honestly, you don't really want to fight this guy because it's got a lot of powerful stuff. For God's sakes, it's got the Gia spell, which we just talked about with the Lamias like a few minutes ago. The fact that it's got that is already enough, but then it's also got like Flame Strike, which
True Seeing, which is like, please tell me you know what True Seeing does.
Yeah, it gives True Sight, which means it can't be like you can always see things. It doesn't matter if it's in dark or low light. It's just able to see whatever it's going on. And then you not only that, it looks like
it does more than that.
Yeah, it also lets you see through magic and into the ethereal plane. I was reading that part. I just read that part. But like my point is that yeah, like it has all of the makings of not just a villain in the Spirit Nagas, but as a wise mentor that it's like right here. Oh, and apparently it can't die.
Yeah.
That I just noticed that.
Yeah, Nagas are immortal. Only a wish spell can prevent them from returning.
And who's gonna waste a wish spell on this? Like that would just be a waste.
That's fair. But also, something that's another small trait that you may not think is a big deal, but actually has huge story implications. Look at the languages the Guardian Naga knows.
Celestial and Common. You don't see Celestial on a lot of monsters. That definitely falls under more of a holy aspect, if that makes sense.
That speaks to a connection to the upper planes, the absolute most holy, most objectively good places. These creatures have had contact with that enough to learn the language. That is a story element right there.
You mean the plane where everything is protected by the baby harp seals?
Basically, yes.
Yes. Mount Celestial. For those of you who aren't aware of the joke, there's a guy named Puffin Forrest, and he says that Mount Celestial, the most good plane of existence in the multiverse, is protected by baby harp seals. And I feel like these guys would be communicating with the baby harp seals and not eating them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
All right.
So you know what I'm gonna give this? I'm gonna give this. So I know I said I wasn't gonna do this, but honestly, based on everything you said and the various ways that these guys can be used as a monster in a campaign, I'm gonna give these. I'm gonna give these 5 out of 5 flumps, because one thing is obviously you have the Guardian Nagas, which play the good role, the mentor, the Yoda. And not only that, they have a lot of powerful abilities behind them, so that's really interesting. Then you got the Spirit Nagas, which are the big bad guy, or maybe like the mid bad guy, like the midway fight bad guy. They're not like, maybe they're the second in command of the big one, but they are still good. And also, I just noticed, these guys can't be killed either. This is the ones you would want to use the wish spell on, because they're just going to come back and try to eat you.
I mean, look at the quote that's given with them. If you destroy me, I will return, and everyone you care about will suffer for it. That's not an empty threat.
No. And you know what? I believe that, because the way this guy looks and what it can do, this is a fucking threat.
This is Obi-Wan, but evil.
I was about to, you know what? You beat me to it. You beat me to the fact that I was about to say that. Anyway, but no, like just the various forms of this thing, it's great. I love it. I'll give this one a 5 out of 5 flumps. So we're gonna move on to my next one. So we're gonna keep the construct train going, because I like constructs, but we're gonna go something a little bit easier. We're gonna go with the traditional. Well, let me ask you this, Chitter. You're familiar with zombies, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're kind of, well, they're kind of arrow fodder, if you ask me.
Well, they are very much arrow fodder, because as you always know, when you fight the necromancer needs to have the undead armies to fight to compensate for it. However, there is always one thing in the necromancer's arsenal that you can pull off, and that is, of course, the flesh golem. Okay. So let me start by saying this. The flesh golem is not the most dangerous enemy, nor is it the most groundbreaking enemy, nor is it, I would say, the biggest threat enemy. What it is it is the lingering threat enemy. That's what I think this can be described as the flesh golem. And now you may be asking yourself, why do I say that? Here's why. The flesh golem is essentially a living corpse. It's stitched together, it's been brought back, but it still maintains most of its original, I would say, traits from when it was alive. But it does have a lot of interesting things. Like, for example, it can go berserk, which, if you don't know what that is, it basically means that if it starts at low health, we roll a d6. If it gets a d6, it goes berserk, and it will just go on a rampage. And it will be like if you're fighting a barbarian who's raging out. It will just keep being berserk until it's either dead or it gets its HP back. Now, a lot of the time, you're not going to heal it back. So you got to fight this thing down. But it's being that it will just keep attacking enemies over and over and over again, it's relentless in its pursuit. It's not going to fall for it's not going to fall for taunts. It's not going to fall for, like, tanks. It's not going to fall for, like, maybe someone's trying to draw its attention. No, it's going to go to the nearest guy and it's going to punch the shit out of you. And if you are a wizard, a sorcerer, or a wizard or a sorcerer or a bard, you do not want this thing to follow you because it will kick the crap out of you. It can hit hard. Now, if the
smash.
Yeah, pretty much, like, me smash. But the thing is that if you are fighting the big bad necromancer, there is a chance to calm it down. Because if the creator is within 60 feet of it, they can make a persuasion check to calm it down, because the berserk isn't just against your party. It's against everything in the room. So that's what makes this thing kind of a threat. Because if you put, like, let's say you were in a room with multiple enemies, and you have, like, maybe one of these guys, maybe two would probably be the most, and you both get them down to around half health. These things are just going to go rushing through the fodder and beating the shit out of it as far as it can do. So now you have, like, an interesting little concept where you can have these things be a temporary ally, and you can target the smaller guys, but then this thing is still going to be a threat. So you have to think about that. And on top of that, it really is based off of Frankenstein. So, like, obviously you have the aversion to fire. This thing does not like fire. It has disadvantage against fire attacks. So the common fireball, the fire bolt, the scorching rays, all of that stuff, which is something like a sorcerer would have, it's going to be a much better aid to you in taking these things down. But in the same point, wizards that use lightning damage, like Witch's Bolt, they can absorb it and then heal themselves. So it automatically gets an immunity to a type of magic that a lot of people don't normally have, on top of being immune to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magical attacks. So at a mid-level, this thing is like, you have to have magic weapons or you have to have fire magic. This thing is not going to go down normally. On top of that, it can make 2 slam attacks in a turn, so it does have multi-attack. And this thing is just a freaking tank on feet. But
fair enough.
But let's move away from, like, what the flesh golem is like. It's a zombie, obviously, but you also could use it for other things as well. For example, they are ageless guardians. You could have these guys set up in ancient tombs. You could have these guys be like the guardians of, like, a big treasure room. You could have these guys be like creatures made out of clay and earth, because it is an option to go with that. They could be like undead soldiers that have been down here for so long and have been guarding something that they don't even remember why they were down here. But they are single-minded gold. They just are relentless. That's what I like to describe them as. The relentless nature of these things is something I love. Because as a DM, I want to have a fight be memorable in one way or another. And monsters that have, like, hidden little advantages that the party can take advantage of are so much fun. And this is one of them. If you get this thing down to half health in a big room, holy crap, now you have, like, 2 additional temporary party members, because they're not going to care. They're just going to beat the shit out of anyone nearby. And not only that, just the look at these things, they look threatening as hell. Like all stitched up, slobbering, barely able to comprehend stuff. You can't really persuade them to do anything. They are out to do one thing and one thing only. If you get in the way of that goal, you're going to get slammed. If you try to stop them, you're going to get slammed. And if you don't have a torch in your hand, Cheddar, what do you think's going to happen?
Smash.
Slammed, but yes.
Well, I figured I might as well make it a little bit different.
Funny, yeah, no. Appreciate that, by the way. But nah, and that's another thing I like about these things, is that the relentless nature of these guys is so much fun. You can have them pop up as like normal zombies. You can have them be the floor guardian of something. You don't want to have these guys like be like just random cannon fodder, but like they can be. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with them, and you don't feel like there's anything. And not only that, you can even have them be like a mid-tier like endgame boss for like a low-level party, like at level, let's say 3, a full party of 3 people. They could take one of these guys down, but then they would know about the berserk feature. They might know about how to deal with like monsters that have built-in weaknesses and have built-in strengths, and it's a teaching tool as well. You don't get that a lot with some of the early game monsters, especially stuff like, for example, like when we go back to the fairy dragon. The fairy dragon was teaching you about layers and how to use like dragon stuff. Here, it's teaching you about monsters that have their own like a weakness that you need to find out and how to exploit. And I think that's kind of cool. It's a good teaching tool.
Yeah, that's what a lot of these things should be, is that there's a difference between a monster and a teacher.
Exactly.
And one thing that I wish that they had done with the Monster Manual is not put things by their letter, but by their CR rating.
I think that's a good point.
Because that way, the DMs would be looking like, okay, what cool things can I pull up at 3? What cool things can I pull up at 5, 6, 7, 1, 3, whatever? Like, it doesn't matter. But instead, you're pulling it up from a name, and that can mean nothing.
And not to mention, like, if you look at the Monster Manual, a lot of the times there are, like, monsters of the same class or the same, like, family that have such different monster challenge ratings, and you could easily put one that's way too powerful into a fight for a group that's not ready for it.
Absolutely. Like, that does teach you as the DM to not do that, but that's a lesson that you should have to come by organically, not because the Monster Manual led you astray.
And that's why I think the Flesh Golem is a good teaching tool for DMs as well, because it combines 2 things that all DMs should know how to do. Have a challenging fight, but have a way for the party to win. And I think that's a good thing. And remember, like, this thing is super weak to fire. One of the most common magic types out there. Like, we all know, like, for cantrips, you have Firebolt. For level 1 spells, Scorching Ray. If you're somehow fighting these guys and you have access to Fireball, these things are pretty much doomed. Like, once you get to Fireball, this thing is pretty much like it's just gonna die. But before then, knowing that your magic, like, knowing tactics is always a good thing to teach your party, and the DM should know that.
Yeah, it's not enough to give your party tough things to fight. It's to give them tough things to fight and make them enjoy it.
Exactly. So for that reason alone, I'm going to give the Flesh Golem a 4 out of 5 flumps, because the Flesh Golem teaches you how to fight, it teaches you how to set up a fighting chance for your party, and teaches your party how to tackle big threats without putting themselves at too much of a disadvantage. It's a great teaching tool, and it's also clearly a very creepy looking monster, which it gets in some style points in my opinion.
Yeah. Also, just saying this, you do realize that the Frankenstein thing is actually really intentional with the absorption of lightning and
Yeah.
the aversion to fire, right?
Yeah, like I even said that earlier. It's like, it's pretty obvious, but it's a good kind of obvious too. So Chitter, we're going on to your number I think we're up to your number 3, and this
Yeah.
one I'm a little trying to. I'm still trying to figure out more about these things because I wasn't even aware this was a whole family of stuff. But we're gonna be talking next about the myconoids or the myconoids or the mushroom people. We're gonna be talking about the mushroom people.
Yeah, the myconids. Now, myconids are really, really interesting because they aren't just mushroom people. They 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 are so interesting. Basically, they have a gigantic range of heights that can make you go, "Oh, they're so tiny too. Why am I staring at a building of mushroom?" They can go from 2 to 12 feet. I'm not kidding.
It does look like
Like
that.
imagine, yeah, like imagine looking up at a 12-foot mushroom going, "Oh, that's a big mushroom." And then it comes to life and looks down at you and you realize you're staring at a building of mushroom that can stomp you. Like, huh, this is what a dwarf feels like.
On top of that, it looks like.
But
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, you go ahead first.
Well, I was just gonna say it obviously seems to me like not only are they can be of different sizes, they also can be of various challenge ratings too, because it looks like the sprouts start at 0, and then just based on what we had access to in the book, they can go up to about what looks like maybe a challenge rating 3, maybe even a 4, depending on how you build it.
Yeah. And this is what gets really fascinating is that not only can it be a level 2 challenge rating, which is kind of like an interesting way to deal with like hallucination spores or pacifying spores or rapport spores. So basically like telepathically communicating or pacifying you by stunning you or be poisoned for a minute as you're incapacitated and off your damn mind with drugs. But there's something else that makes a myconid sovereign terrifying. And that is the animating spores. Because if you try to fight one of these things and your character goes down, you're getting back up, but on their side.
Oh boy, that's not good. And I think that's also another thing I love about mushrooms and just in general. Um, if we look at mushrooms in other media, like the most famous being right now probably The Last of Us, this is essentially that. They are bringing you back from the dead as a fungus that you cannot deal with unless you are able to destroy them by fighting. And that is a dangerous concept because they're an infection species. And I think that's so just reading what I'm noticing here is not just the animating spores. They also can do pacifying spores. They can do report spores, and also looks like hallucinogenic spores, which basically means that they can essentially just have the whole of an area, uh, like have a whole zone to itself, like lair style, without really needing to be like a big villain.
Yeah, it is. It is insane. And here's where it gets interesting: is that myconids have a whole society, and it's fascinating to look into because you look at the sprouts and you just go, well, why would I ever use these aside from being like kicking fodder? Why would I ever use a myconid adult when all I could use is sovereign for a good threat? But no, myconid society are known as, ironically, circles. They're kind of where druids take inspiration from, actually. And circle members contain 4 members from each of the myconid age groups and were presided over by 4 sovereigns. Circle members meld together. It's seen as a very intimate but necessary component of day-to-day life of just melding and those rapport spores coming out and communicating telepathically with each other. And each myconid community is organized by age category, its population under careful control, new tasks given to the fungi as they grow older. It's like this combination of melding is like this combination of like entertainment, social interaction, worship, and meditation all in one. Fungi folk of age 16 to 20 would serve as guards. It's this whole like it's a really symbiotic community that you can just look at and go, this could form into so many different plot points, and it's amazing. You just look at it and you just go, well, these stats are a little bit boring. And I will say that the myconids aren't really given everything that they need to be there. Sure, the melding is there, and sure, they speak of a colony. But when you dig a little bit deeper, then you realize, whoa, this is what the Underdark is about. This is a main faction of the Underdark for a reason. These are colonies of mushroom people that are just living this symbiotic ritual life underground the way that they know how. And it's really fascinating that these didn't become as popular as like elves and dwarves and whatnot, because they're basically proto-druids in the way that they are just so intimately connected with each other in nature. It is fascinating. And I'm amazed that it took till the Golgari for wizards to release a circle of spores, because this is just druids in a living society underground, basically. And if I had to suggest how an Underdark civilization that the party gets introduced to the whole concept, I would go with myconids, because they have so much that is fascinating about them, and they have so much depth to them that makes you want to just go and observe their society instead of just being like, oh yeah, that's a neat little thing. You're like, wait, what's going on?
And not only that, they don't really even seem like bad. Like they're they don't even seem like bad creatures either. They legitimately just seem like they don't want to bother you, and if you don't bother them, they also don't pose a big threat. So you could have them like be a small threat, or you could have them be a big threat, or you could have them be no threat. And every option is valid just because of how they're set up. And I think that's kind of cool too. Is that it's a modular villain or a modular monster.
Yeah, and it's a modular community, because you can just be like, hey, if you want to play as a custom lineage that comes from the Underdark, there you go. Put on a telepath feat, and you're a myconid with your spores. And there you go. Like, that is something that I genuinely love, and I genuinely am disappointed. Not at Wizards so much this time, but more so at how the community just didn't pick these guys up and run with them, because there's so much there. And I kind of wish that they had been a player class as well.
I mean, there's always a homebrew option. I think it's definitely something. I can even see a point where these guys could be like, you could have a tyrant level of these guys, like the Micro Tyrant, which is a legitimate card from Magic the Gathering. And they are, without a doubt, like, that card was fun. And it basically, you could build a whole campaign around something like that, too. Just have, like, it's a fungus. It spreads. Like, yes, it's a plant. Yes, some of it's going to be working on a colony. But there is a good chance that this thing could be a legitimate, not only threat, it could be a continuous threat, because you have to, like, take out the nerve center, and that's not easy with something that can grow.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because the myconid sovereigns can produce spore servants, which is any large or smaller creature brought to life by the animating spores. And here's the thing. They retain their armor class, hit points, hit die, strength, dexterity, constitution, vulnerabilities, resistances, and immunities. But they lose their original saving throw and skill bonuses, special senses, and special traits. It loses any action that isn't multi-attack or a melee weapon attack. If it has an action or a melee weapon that deals some other type of damage, it loses the ability to deal that type of damage unless it comes from a piece of equipment. It loses all known languages, but responds to orders given to it by the telepathic spores. And it's basically, you basically just watch this person that you knew turn into a zombie, basically. Like an actual, like, mushroom zombie.
That is not ever a bad story beat to have mushroom zombies. I think those are such a cool thing that you could have as not only a DM, but as a big bad guy. This thing would be amazing to fight against. I honestly have to admit, like, maybe not the sprouts, obviously, because there's no real challenge in that, but you can always add, like, one thing I've noticed is that you can add new types of spores as well, because if you keep the same spore ruling, you can have it maybe like a more advanced micronid that has maybe a rage spore, which causes people to not hallucinate but go into like barbarian rages. And you can have caster spores, which are like, maybe they simulate magic spells. These things are like very open, and it's kind of like, I hate to say it. No, I don't hate to say that. This is actually another Dungeon Master's paintbrush monster, because it allows you to create using your imagination a monster that is not only a threat to your party, but it's not broken because it can be anywhere between the big bad guy or it can be a minor threat. It's up to you as the DM to eventually see what's going on, but I honestly think this could definitely fall into the category of Dungeon Master paintbrush monsters. Or DM paintbrush monsters.
And this also gives you a non, like, I won't say non-evil, but this gives you a chance to see how a different community works, and also like a chance to look into a form of necromancy that gives the players a taste of it, because it loses a lot of things that could make it more deadly. But when undead truly come back, they gain a lot more powerful stuff.
That is 100% true. And I honestly, I'm going to say this. I might, like, even with the Golgari, I could see this being, like, a legitimate threat. And you're right. Maybe they don't need, like, I do wonder why it did take so long to make Circle of Spores, but I will say, like, if you look at how much they've been promoting Circle of Spores, like, in Baldur's Gate 3, that was one of the subclasses for druids. You have the really fun one that's really popping up now in Dungeons and Dragons. Now it's an official one. I think they're giving it its due, and I think there might be a time where there could be even an official campaign setting where something like this could be the big bad guy. And I hope that happens, because I would love to see a group of people fight against this. Maybe not on the level of Curse of Strahd, but something like this would definitely be something fun to play with in story-wise.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna give this thing. I'm gonna give this a 4.5 flumps out of 5.
All right, on to the next thing.
Right, on to the next one. So, okay, folks. So this one was not. So this one was mine, and I know people are gonna go like, "Oh God, no, not this damn thing!" But I absolutely love it. Chitter, it's the Zorn.
Oh.
Nothing can stop the Zorn. Okay, so.
Oh no.
Yeah, the Zorn. Okay, so some of you are probably wondering, what the fuck is the Zorn? Because if you've not played Dungeons and Dragons, the Zorn is one of those classic monsters that I consider in the same family as the Rust Devil, but in a different sense. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Zorn is like an earth elemental. It's made out of rock. It's not a bad or a good creature. It's a beast. And by that I mean it does two things. It wants to eat, and it wants to kill. Or it wants to, no, I take that back. It wants to eat and it wants to find treasure. That's all the Zorn is. It's a treasure goblin. But what I love about this guy is that there is honestly a debate that you can make that the party doesn't want to kill this thing. Because if a Zorn is nearby, there is treasure nearby. Because one of its big things is that by scent, it can find precious metals, it can find stones, coins, gems within 60 feet of this thing. This thing is a treasure magnet, and I love these things because they're just so random. Because you don't really know what this thing is here for. It could be maybe it could be eating a box of a chest of money that somebody left behind. Maybe it's guarding an ancient weapon. Maybe it's just been trapped here from the elemental earth plane and, it's eating diamonds. Who knows? But I like it because it's so unique. Now,
and what I find interesting about it is the last thing that it mentions in the basic rules is that because they are unable to consume organic material, they ignore most other creatures. And because it isn't evil, it pleads or bargains in hope of convincing owners to give up their treasure, offering up information it has learned from its travels in exchange. So this would also be a great way to have like an information barterer with stuff you don't need.
Exactly.
Or if you're willing to give up something extra valuable, you could gain more information that you wouldn't have normally had access to.
And not only that, one thing I love about the Zorn is that it kind of falls under okay, so this is going to be like I'm going to need to go into a little bit of detail with this to properly explain it. If you've obviously probably played the Waterdeep campaign setting, right? Or
I've done bits and pieces of it, yes.
Okay, but you're familiar with Waterdeep. In
Absolutely.
Waterdeep, there is a kingpin known as Xanthar, or Xanathar. I don't know how it's pronounced properly, but I call him Xanthar. He's a beholder, and beholders are typically big bad guy creatures, but this one is a crime boss. I consider it, like, very odd when you have a creature that defies expectations. And I consider Zorns on the same level as Xanathar, not in terms of their, like, threat, but because they don't fit the traditional role of monsters. He looks like a monster. He clearly wants to eat something, but he's not a bad guy. The Zorn is, in a sense, it's a combination of, can you bargain with this thing? Most likely, yes. Is it going to probably swindle you out of your money? Yes, it'll probably do that too. Can you fight this thing? It's pretty fucking tough. But at the end of the day, it's very unique in the fact that it doesn't fit a traditional role of monsters. And Xanthar is like another one of those guys because Xanthar is, he's a crime boss. He is trying to commit evil, and beholders are very much, they want to kill shit. And Zorns, in my opinion, they don't want to do that. They want to eat gold. They want to eat gems. They want to eat metal. And I just love it because, like, you can have this thing, like, let's say you're partying in a mine, and you round the corner, and you roll the perception roll, and you see this thing eating on a gold vein. Like, now your party's like, wait a minute, what the fuck is that thing? And you can have them fight it, or you can have them go like, wait, stop, I do not want to fight you. Instead, I only want to eat grubs. And he's just eating a fistful of gold. This is grub. But...
And then the party just has, like, a morality, like, struggle, like, it's your food, but also that would get us out of debt.
I'm just saying maybe we killed him. I don't want to die. My name is Jerry. I don't know. I think we should kill Jerry. He's clearly evil. But, like, it's one of those things where it can have, like, not only a humorous moment, but, like, they don't fit that role. I've said this, I know I've said that multiple times in my explanation of them. They're not even really good fighters because they can make, like, 3 claw attacks and a bite attack, and that's it. They can't cast magic. They're not really, like, combat oriented. So they're not big threats. They are very defensive like, but they are, at the end of the day, they're just like, how the manual describes them. They're thieves and they're beggars and thieves. But they're beggars and thieves that are from a different plane. And I like that because you have so much interesting stuff that you can do with this guy. And not only that, if you put him in like a mine area, you can even have him like scurry about and follow the party around because he's got stone camouflage. So he could easily like maybe pass a stealth check and be good at it. He does have +3 stealth. Like, is he going to always get those big numbers? No. But, at the end of the day, it's unique and it fills a new role. Plus, if I'm being honest, you could, as a DM, have this happen. You could have the Zorn, like, eating the gems and metals out of a treasure hoard. It could lead you to a dragon's hoard if it knows where it is, and be like, if you give me the diamonds and gems, you can have the rest of the stuff, and it leads you there. And obviously, you might be fighting a big dragon, and you might die. But having that creature show you where something like really valuable could be, and working out a deal, is 100 times more interesting than just beating the shit out of him and then stealing what he's got. Because sometimes combat's not the answer.
Yeah, combat can be extremely exciting, but it can also be an extreme downer.
Exactly.
Like if you're just doing it over and over and over and over and over again.
And the Zorn is one of those. The Zorn has built-in redundancies to avoid combat. Now, is he like the big bad guy? Nah. Like I said, he's not really that. He's not even that big of a threat. It's just a creature that you could put in there that they can fight, but they really shouldn't because the benefits outweigh the cost for fighting this guy. And also, he can burrow himself into the ground 20 feet and run away. So, it is what it is. I'll give the Zorn a 3.5 out of 5 flumps because he's a great creature, a little limited in what you can do with him, but a good DM can take those limitations and make them really interesting. And I also love the way this guy looks because I think he's kind of cool, and that's my view of the Zorn.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing.
Okay, so Chitter, we're up next, and this one we were actually talking about for my character. It's the Pseudo Dragon.
Yes, this little guy is so amazing.
Okay, and we're back. So, you were saying?
Yeah, sorry, my apologies. Pseudo Dragon is one of my favorites. It is a cat dragon, basically.
So when
now,
you say
of course,
cat,
you're probably one.
Yeah, I was about to say. So when you say cat dragon,
well, first of all, it has little interest in other creatures and avoids them whenever possible. If they are provoked, they will use a stinger at the tip of its tail. One jab of which can put a creature in a catatonic state that can last for hours, which is quite impressive. But also, that definitely sounds like a cat who's just like, leave me alone.
But I think we've all dealt with a cat like that just like bats at you with its paw.
Yeah, pretty much. Or or a cat that has a claw and knows it has a claw and likes to swipe at you when it's done with you.
Fair point.
I have a cat like that. I have a cat like that. It's old and grumpy. and it can't get sick because sickness is scared of it.
So, you're saying that the Pseudo Dragon is able to withstand the power of illness, then?
Well, a little bit. But a lot of mages actually seek out these Pseudo Dragons because of their telepathic ability, their relatively agreeable disposition, compared to imps and quasits and whatnot. But the thing is that a Pseudo Dragon is very selective. It will choose a companion that it wants to be with. It can be won over with food or treasure, but as long as you treat it fairly, then the Pseudo Dragon will stay with you. If you treat it like garbage, it will leave you without even telling you.
Yeah, that seems about right. For a cat, anyway.
Yeah. And they can't speak, but they can communicate via that telepathy that I mentioned earlier. They can communicate basic ideas such as, I'm hungry, feed me, fill my bowl. Curiosity, what are you looking at? You're done reading now. Or affection of, pet me now, you're done reading now. And when it bonds with a companion, it can communicate it over a very long distance, otherwise known as, yes, I know you're upstairs and hungry, come down, your food bowl's down here. Also, the pseudo-dragon often vocalizes animal noises. A purr indicates pleasure, a hiss means unpleasant surprise, a chirp can represent desire, and a growl always means anger or discontent. So if you hear a chirping pseudo-dragon on your lap, you're not moving.
So basically, this thing acts more like a familiar than actual enemy. Then.
Exactly, and there is a variant of a pseudo-dragon familiar where it can bond with it and you can talk with it within a mile of each other. And when you're within 10 feet of your your pseudo-dragon, you share its magic resistance trait.
Okay, so basically, so if this thing's like close by and I had it as a familiar, I immediately get magic resistance to everything.
You gain advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects for free.
That is entirely broken, especially on certain classes. Like, for example, paladins already have high armor classes, so having them have magic resistance just for free, that would be like...
I will say this. You either have to work at getting the familiar, like you actively have to go on a quest to entice the pseudo-dragon, which can be done, but that's a very low-level quest, or you have to be a warlock who automatically gets it as an option.
So,
but if you are willing to go on that quest and gain a pseudo-dragon, you basically get a super powerful cat.
So, something you mentioned earlier, and I was hoping you'd clarify this a little bit more. When you say warlocks have automatically can get this as a familiar, is it a particular like path, particular pack for warlocks, or can it just be like any warlock can get access to this thing?
Yes, it is a particular pact. It is Pact of the Chain. And they get a choice between they get additional automatic familiar choices, including a sprite, a quasit, an imp, and a pseudo-dragon. Now, meta gaming D&D speaking, the imp is the best because it does come with some additional features. However, if you're looking for the for the best good option, like one that you will actively look at as good, then the pseudo-dragon is your best bet. Plus, I myself, you had mentioned before with one of your monsters, a story that you had, and one of mine with the pseudo-dragon was actually a very interesting campaign where I didn't take the imp, even though it was the quote-unquote better familiar. But when my character was seduced by a succubus and enthralled by them, the sign that they were enthralled was the fact for the next session or two, they had an imp as their familiar. You can use familiars as not only like mechanical bonuses or an extra like NPC or whatnot. You can even use them as story beats and story indicators like that. Where my character had this like attachment to the pseudo-dragon because it contained the spirit of their dead lover. But then suddenly, for inexplicable reasons, they had an imp for 2 sessions. And everyone had to figure out, oh, they'd actually been seduced by a succubus unwillingly, and they were made to have this familiar in their service, which was really interesting.
Hmm.
Also, I'm just going to say this. The sting is busted on a warlock. Because you look at it and you go, okay, +4 to hit, 1 creature, 4 piercing damage. Oh, a DC 11 con save, or become poisoned for 1 hour. And if the saving throw fails by 5 or more, the target falls unconscious for the same duration. So it's for an hour. Or until it takes damage or another creature uses an action to shake it awake. Okay. So that's like a 6 or below, you know, something that a fair few amount of creatures even at lower levels could be, right?
Exactly.
See, that's the thing. And I can't remember if it's the invocation or the pact, because I always just took both at the same time when I could. I do believe it's the invocation of the Chain Master. It makes it so that the familiar's DC saves match your own as a warlock.
So what you're saying
So
is there's a chance that not only you can make the DC saving throw like an 18, but if they get 13 or lower, they're unconscious for an hour. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we have I dropped a boss this way.
Oh god, this is a Bunsworth level strategy if I ever heard one.
Like, no lie, I dropped a boss with this because they had used their legendary resistances on other spells that made sense, because my familiar wasn't much of a threat, and that made sense. And my familiar also only has 7 hit points, so I wasn't getting it close at the time. But then I was like, I don't have any other options. I'm gonna send it to Sting, and it stinged, and then it failed by over 5. And this big bad that had all 5 of my party member allies on the ropes went completely unconscious, and we just circled it, metaphorical hammers ready, and we just signaled 1, 2, 3, bang, 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 bap, 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 bap.
Well,
Because it's unconscious, it can't do shit.
I mean, so like, no, it can't like, it can't. So like, would all attacks be crits then if it was unconscious?
Yes, because it was also prone.
Oh
And
dear
so we
god.
got advantage too.
Oh dear god.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that the warlock thing is kind of underratedly busted.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to give this thing like a 4 out of 5 then, because it's pretty busted. But no, like honestly, I think this is kind of cool. It's not even like,
And if you treat it like crap, the DM can just have it disappear, and you have to make a whole new familiar.
oh yeah, that would be definitely bad if it's like, if it took away that like. So like, hold on, but I thought if as a Pact of the Chain, you could summon your familiar from anywhere. Like it would have to like, could it break?
Yeah, but pseudo dragon, it even as a draconic familiar, it just straight up says a pseudo dragon puts up with no ill treatment, and it abandons the manipulative or abusive companion without warning. Even as a familiar, if you decide to treat it poorly, it can go, no, screw you, and leave.
That is 100% true. Now that I think about it, dang, honestly, now that it's, I don't even know what to say about this thing, because everything you said, like all of it sounds like it's got not only a lot of power behind it, but it's an unassuming amount of power. That's so cool.
And if you want it as a familiar, that sets up another interesting quest with a tiny little dragon thing, where you're like, okay, I'm going on this quest to get a pseudo dragon as my familiar because I think I'm a good person and I can prove myself. That is role play to the extreme, because you're trying to convince this tiny little thing that you cannot hurt. You cannot hurt it, because either you'll kill it or it will look at you and go, "You just tried to hit me. Why would I want to join you?"
So it also has that. So it also has the ability to be like a really good story-driven moment as well. And I think that is just. I didn't. Okay, so look, I'm gonna say this. When you proposed this one to me, when we were prepping for the show, I honestly was like, I can get behind most of them. I don't get what Chitter's going on about with the pseudo dragon because I didn't really understand it. And this is one of the things that I think that Monster Manual does dirty because it doesn't explain like that whole that creative aspect of what you can do with it. Because nowhere in the book would it explain that. I read the page before we started, and I didn't get where you were going from with this, but now that you've explained like the whole bonuses that you can get from the pact, I totally not only see that this is not only a threat, it could be a game-breaking threat too in the right build, which is another thing that I don't think most DMs we're aware of. So I gotta hand it to you. You really surprised me with this one.
Yeah, this is a familiar that I genuinely looked at and went, they made this a dragon for a reason. And it's like the fairy dragon. They made it a dragon for a reason.
And a good one at that. And I do like the fact that even having a dragon as a familiar, which is not, like, obviously, the dragons in Dungeons & Dragons are gigantic. So to have, like, an option like that, it's nice to know that something like this happens. Even though it might seem basic, it has the ability to be really good at it, too. So I'm going to give this, a solid 4.5 flumps out of 5.
Yeah. Also, just really quickly, you had mentioned before about the pseudo dragon leaving and whatnot, and how it could do that. Even in the variant for the pseudo dragon familiar, the very last sentence, at any time and for any reason, the pseudo dragon can end its service as a familiar, ending the telepathic bond.
Dang, I think that would be terrible for a warlock that's based around that.
Yeah. So imagine a warlock that was in like a crisis moment, and then suddenly it realizes, I'm not talking to my pseudo dragon anymore. Where'd it go? It's done being your familiar, and you have to go on this side story quest to get that familiar back. It's not overly powerful. Like you could very easily be like, oh, I'll just make another one with like 10 gold and whatnot. But your character forms a bond with those familiars if you're playing it correctly. And your character seeing a familiar willingly leave you that you gained its trust with, your character would feel compelled to go on this journey of, like a small journey of, why did it leave me? Can I get it back? If I can't, what do I do? Why, what's going on? And it's just this moment of crisis. And it's from a familiar that has no more than at most 10 HP. And it causes this crisis of self that the entire party has to stop and go, no, this is something is wrong here.
Well, I'll definitely keep an eye out for adding maybe some form of a pseudo dragon, especially if people want to make a character. But I'll give it this. It's definitely an unassuming monster, and that's a good thing. And speaking of unassuming monsters, we're going to go on to my next one. And Chitter, I think we all are familiar with the classics. When you think of Dungeons and Dragons, there's dragons, there's illithids like the Mind Flayer, the Demogorgon from Stranger Things has now been popular, and Varric. But we all know there is one monster that is synonymous with Dungeons and Dragons. It's the gelatinous cube. So my next.
Oh, god damn it.
Yeah, no. So mine is, of course, the famously silly monster, the gelatinous cube. And I love it. No, not on that. Not when we record the 17+ version, then you can say it. But no. So the cube. Let's be 100% certain here. This is not much of a monster. It's not intelligent. It's not even really, like, some could argue it's not even alive. It's more like a cube shape of just goo that somehow managed to form into a cube shape. You know, because oozes, they don't typically, like, have much in the form of thought. But you can't deny that the gelatinous cube is iconic. I would dare say it's probably one of the most iconic monsters that Gary Gygax has ever made. And that's why I put it on the list, because I love the iconicity of it, but also because this thing is a noob trap. I love it. It's like, for example, I've had, like, in my last campaign before you joined, we had a fight between Mantis and June, and they were fighting a black pudding. And a black pudding is like the toppest level of ooze. I think that they would have honestly, and the gelatinous cube is just like the tier below it. Basically, all it is it's an acid cube. If you go into it, it's going to slowly dissolve you and consume you. And I have seen so many campaigns where they're like, you don't find any traps, you you fall down a trap door, and boom, you're dissolved by a gelatinous cube. This thing is more of a trap than a monster, but the thing I love about it is that it's not even like a big threat. You're not going to run into this thing while running down a hallway. You're not going to be running down this thing and it's not going to be chasing you. If you run into this thing, it's because this thing is just going to be around a corner that you were not paying attention. And it can't even really move that far because it only can go about 15 feet. So you can just walk away from it. It's not going to kill you.
See, that's where I actually I disagree with you a little bit, because there's one ability that it has that could actually make it terrifying going down a hallway running.
Go on.
Transparent. Even when the cube is in plain sight, it takes a DC 15 Wisdom Perception check to spot a cube that has neither moved nor attacked. A creature that tries to enter the cube space while unaware of the cube is surprised by the cube.
That is true. That is true. And I think most DMs do not use that when it comes to the gelatinous cube. I think a lot of them use it as you fall down a hole and boom, you end up in a cube. And then you have to have some way to someone pull you out. But I don't think...
This could be that you're running down a hallway. It seems to be never ending. You're not moving. Your arm feels like it's in a lot of pain right now. What's going on? I need you to make a perception check for me, kind of deal. And then you're like, oh no.
Oh, we're in a cube.
What have I gotten myself into? Yeah, what have I gotten myself into? Because it takes up the entire space. And as it says with the ooze cube, other creatures can enter this space, but a creature that does so is subjected to the cube's engulf and has disadvantage on the saving throw. Now imagine this. The cube is in this hallway. You don't see it. And then you see your ally get engulfed by the cube. You finally see it. But there's no way back. The door has closed. And the cube is slowly moving forward, inching along as the goo sticks to the next portion of the wall as it drags itself forward.
And not only that, it's also a slow death. Which means that if your whole party gets caught in the goo, and there have been instances where this has happened, and there's no way to get out. You guys are just gonna sit there and dissolve. Your DM can have a lot of very painful fun with that by going like, you slowly feel your skin burn, your armor melts, and you are left fully exposed as the goo continues to dissolve you. And there's no way to get out because once you are trapped by the creature, you have to use strength, which, if you're a barbarian, a paladin, or a fighter, okay, that's not the end of the world. Strength is pretty much your bread and butter. If you're a rogue, you're probably not going to have a lot of strength, but you're probably not going to have some. But if you're a caster like bards, sorcerers, wizards, you're not gonna you're gonna be you probably have like a -1 in strength, and so you have to beat a 13. It's possible, but you also could fail. And wizards don't have a lot of HP to begin with, so you're already gonna be at a major disadvantage if you get trapped in this thing. But there's one particular reason why I put this on the list, and it's gonna involve a little story. In 2010, I was reading a comic online called PvP, and they had a small like pseudo arc involving something called the Table Titans. Basically, D&D nuts who are playing a game of who are playing like the world's hardest module. The main bad guy,
Okay.
not the main bad guy, one of the characters brought one of his like level 20 rogues back because he was back from a pocket dimension. He was making a perception check. He failed it, fell down a dust chute, and then was immediately dissolved by a cube. And so the priest was like, I have a way to bring you back, but I'm not sure if this, but I don't think you're going to like it. And he's like, oh, just do it already, please. I need to have my character back. And so he casts a spell. And I swear to God, I don't know if this is true or not, but if it is, I want to pull this off someday. He didn't bring him back. He merged his soul with the cube to create a living gelatinous cube creature that could walk, talk, and act like the character and was controlled by the player. So it was basically like we ensnare. It's like if you watch Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
It's like a plasmoid.
Well, yes, and that is what a gelatinous cube is. It's a plasmoid.
Yeah.
But it was
all right.
Yeah, but like so that was a fun little thing. Again, that was more like just it was a good memory. I'm not saying like you could do that in the game unless there's a spell I'm just not aware of, but like even so, the gelatinous cube, it can be a trap, it can be a threat, it can be a silly like, oh, we're not falling for that type of deal, but everyone's going to remember their first death from the gelatinous cube. No one ever forgets that. If you had a player character that you love so much and you end up getting killed by a cube, that's going to be a funny story for every future campaign you are ever in, and you will never forget it, and it's always going to be, and it's going to give you a hatred of these things, but I love them. I love the gelatinous cube, and I love the fact that even outside of Dungeons & Dragons, this thing has been memed to death. In Hearthstone, it was a dangerous card back when it was released. In other media, it's obviously the thing that we think of when we think of Dungeons & Dragons. Outside of Dragons, I don't think there's a more iconic monster than the gelatinous cube. That's my own personal take, but I think it could be said that that's a pretty good view of it.
Yeah.
And did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nothing. That was a pretty damn good summary of him.
Well, so my second most favorite monster from the original Monster Manual is, of course, the classic gelatinous cube. I'm going to give it 4.5 flumps out of 5. And also, a little bit of a note here for those of you who are watching the video on YouTube now. Yes, I know we gave all of the monsters here above a 3. This wasn't really a list of monsters we hate. This is more of a monsters that we love. And these are our reasons why. And then this is like on a rating of personal ranking of where I would put it in a campaign. If it's at a 5, I'll find some way to throw it in there. If it's between a 3, if I can find a way to make it work with the story, I'll include it. And maybe when we do like our 5 worst monsters from the monster manuals, we'll go into reasons why we hate these things. But I wanted to include that because
Fair enough.
Yeah, because I didn't want to make it seem like we're not giving things fair ratings. We are. These are just some of the monsters we love. And that's my view of the gelatinous cube. All right, Chitter, we each got one more left on the list, and then we'll be wrapping up. But I saved the most confusing one for you last, and if you remember your list, you know exactly which one I'm talking about. We're gonna be talking, of course, about lycanthropes. So, Chitter, you're gonna have to go into some big detail on this one. So go ahead, tell me, why did you put lycanthropes on here, and why is Gaston getting the shit kicked out of him by the beast?
Okay, the artwork, I have no idea what's going on, but it's awesome anyway.
It is, very much so.
Lycanthropes I picked because it's funny that you said the gelatinous cube was one of the most iconic for like D&D in general. Whereas I find that, especially with a lot of groups that have done Curse of Strahd, lycanthropes are a signature of those campaigns because it's the opposite of the vampire versus werewolf dichotomy. And the funny thing is that lycanthropes are some of the most terrifying player options to make because they are a DM's paintbrush to a curse.
I will not deny that, because you can have so much fun with what you give the curse form into.
Not only that, but you have a choice to resist it or embrace it. And those lead to two very different results. If you resist the curse, you try to hold it, you do everything in your power. You live your life as you always have. You retain your normal alignment and personality while in your humanoid form. However, when the full moon rises, you become the beast form, or into a horrible hybrid form that combines both the animal and humanoid traits. And you lose that alignment, you lose that personality, you basically lose yourself to the beast. When the moon wanes, the beast within can be controlled once again. And if you have a character who doesn't know that they're a lycanthrope, you could just have those events haunt them as bloody dreams. It's great. But if you embrace it, you turn into, you gain some of the things that lycanthrope type has. You gain the speed, you gain the damage immunities when in these forms. You gain damage immunities, traits, and actions that don't involve equipment. They're proficient with the natural attacks. They basically go to you basically can transform at will if you wanted to. Or you could have it be a transformation by moon and still have those things. But you maintain control of yourself. If you play it as a character who has resisted it, you basically lose control of yourself if you resist the curse. And on full moon, DM goes, this character is mine for tonight. And that's really fascinating because alignment is not seen as something that is all that great these days. But if you think about it, like let's say, for example, you have, I don't know, you are a wereboar. So a pig, a werepig.
I think we actually have a photo of that. Let me go ahead and see if we can find it. Where bear? Here it is. So kind of like a Moglin from Legend of Zelda.
Exactly. Now, if you resist the curse when you're normal, like say as a paladin, because I could see this being a paladin most easily, you are someone who is like this devout protector of the weak, and you will help those in remote areas. But then when the curse hits, if you're resisting it, you turn into this evil creature that relishes the fact that as its victims resist its curse along with you, the more savage and bestial they become, changing you forever. Or you could have it where you are a chaotic neutral character and you may turn into like a werebear, which is neutral good. So you may be protective of those near you while you are in that curse. And you may only choose to pass it on to companions or apprentices that choose to follow in your footsteps. Or you could become Were Smokey the Bear and put out fires.
I just thought of something while you mentioned this, and I think this is actually kind of a unique take on it. You could, in fact, there could be a story moment where, as a druid, you get cursed with lycanthropy and become a werebear, and now you have your bear form that you get from Wild Change, and then you get the werebear form as well. So you have two versions of a bear you could turn into. And you honestly could also look at it like, wait a minute, this isn't bad. I was already turning into a bear. Now I just stand on two legs. So I can embrace this.
Exactly. And there's also the stereotypical werewolf, which is chaotic evil, and that one is now it's funny because they throw it out there right as you start to look at werewolf. The company of the Black Moon. They used to be adventurers loyal to the realm. Now they roam the woods as a pack of werewolves. The king had promised estates, titles, and gold to anyone who can undo the curse afflicting them. I, for one, have no interest in such rewards. That just screams paladins that lost themselves to this curse. They resisted it and tried to fight it, but they lost and ended up embracing the worst.
And another thing that I actually think could be a good story beat is were tigers, because if you look at the were tiger, he doesn't look avarice like the were rat. He doesn't look like Smokey the bear, who obviously should be putting on some pants, and he doesn't even look like the werewolf. The were tiger could be like. You could make the argument that this could also be another paladin, but this could be an ascended form of paladins, because tigers are, if we think of it in mythology, they're noble creatures. Paladins are meant to be the most noble version of a human being. In fact, you could make that argument. I mean, obviously, as a DM, you have to make your story based on what you want to tell, but I could see that being the case. And not only that, I see like the werewolf, like, it's played out, but it can be like the big bad guy, and then you can look at all the other versions of the lycanthropes. Like, I even ran a campaign where we had a were-rat, and it was very hard not to have someone not succumb to the disease, but I've had were-rats be a thing. I think they're kind of cool, and they don't get a whole lot of love, but what I'm saying is that... Sorry, go ahead.
I personally have run a campaign where, because of the hero's journey, like that the stuff in Sword Coast and Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, where you basically build your backstory. I had two characters in the same campaign become a were-tiger through different means.
How'd you become a were-tiger, Bill? Curse. Oh, how'd you get it? Ancient magic.
Do you want to know what the most terrifying part of it was?
Sure, go ahead.
One of them was an ooze naturally. Imagine growing fur and bones.
Wait a minute. So he was an ooze, so he was like a plasmoid, and then he basically grew limbs and bones, and then turned back into ooze?
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna have to tell that story one day on the show, but for now, all right, I'm gonna give lycanthropes a 5 out of 5 flumps, because they are unique in the fact that not all of them are bad. They also can allow you to have a very amount of different abilities. And not only that, if you even look down at the very last part of the page, you can have non-human lycanthropes, like the plasmoid, and that would be kind of cool. In fact, you can even have stuff like maybe give them unique variants of their transformations, and that's a good thing to have. I don't consider them Dungeon Master paintbrush monsters, because they are again, it's like... They are a little limited in the fact that you would have to come up with, like, they're just variants of the same thing, but it does open up the idea of what you can do with it. So that's where I'm going with that.
Yeah. And actually, I kind of found something that was a very interesting way of doing them myself, because the player characters as lycanthropes were very, how do I say... vague on how they did it. So basically, I did it in two ways. I did a hybrid transformation and a full transformation. So basically, the full transformation is they cannot use their equipment, they cannot speak while in animal form, and while they gain the immunities, traits, and actions that don't involve equipment and speed, they basically become the full creature that they are. So like a full tiger or full bear or whatever. But then a hybrid would come if they rolled a natural 20 on strength, dexterity, or constitution checks or saves. And they would become the hybrid form where they could use their weapons, speak, and it would last for an hour as like a rush of this of adrenaline in their form shifting with their body becoming more excited or more scared, and the adrenaline just flowing through them causes the transformation.
Nice. I definitely would love to hear more about that. But we are almost out of time, so we're gonna go on to to the last one. And Chitter, you're gonna hate me for this. You're absolutely gonna hate me for this. Because I
Is
said
it a flump?
it's the flump. The flump. Okay. So the flump. Okay. So I'm gonna be honest with you. This is my version of the pseudo dragon. It is. The flump is. I really have not a lot to say in terms of why I picked it, because it's not like. It's not. Okay, this is going to be kind of hard to explain. But the flump to me is like such an odd creature. For one thing, it's an aberration, but it's lawful good. These things are not bad. They're not even like, some could argue they are intelligent, but they don't really know what they're for, because they have advanced telepathy, they can communicate, and they can like help you. They can glow in the dark, but they also can be, but they are very prone to being knocked down and being prone. So they have a built-in kind of like, I would say, built-in weakness, sort of like the flesh golem. But I just love looking at these little things because they're so silly. They are a silly creature. And I think, you know what, as a DM, sometimes you're just going to want to play with something that's funny. And that's what the flump is to me. It's a funny creature that doesn't do much. It's not super threatening. It's honestly, like, it's meant to be a joke. But here's what I love about this thing. So the last line of this thing that makes this thing so interesting is that flumps live in complex, organized groups called cloisters. Basically, they're Smurfs. These are Dungeons and Dragons Smurfs, because each flump has a place and a purpose, and it has and while it's in the village, its role is to be assigned by the group, and that's what it is. So, in a sense, and this is just something silly you could do. You could have a small cloister of flumps in the Underdark if your party walks into it, and you could have, "Hi, I'm Handy Flump. I'm Stretchy Flump. I'm Brainy Flump." And yes, it's silly and it's very childish, but it's also, like, funny because, I mean, just look at these damn things.
Actually, if you look up a little bit further, flumps are actually terrifying to run into if you know what they're about.
And let me guess, it's because they're sensitive to the emotional state of nearby creatures?
No. Psionic siphons. Flumps feed by siphoning mental energy from psionic creatures, and they can be found lurking near communities of mind flayers, aboleths, Githyanki, and Gizzerai. They are passive parasites, only taking the mental energy they need. But if you see a colony nearby, they're being fed by something.
I love the concept of maybe you have a colony of flumps and then you just find out, oh, we are not bad flumps. We are being fed by Elder Brain. And you're like, wait, what? Oh yeah, big brain down there. It feed us flumps.
Actually, it's kind of funny that you say that, because When Flumps encounter good-hearted adventurers, they eagerly share the dark secrets they have learned in the hopes of casting down their evil sources of energy, even if doing so means they must seek out new sources of nourishment.
Okay, can you see why I love these things? Like, it's like, oh, we are not bad flumps. We are just feeding off of bad flump energy. Here, let me teach you the spell to summon the devil. What? It's like,
Why are you teaching me this?
because so you go kill big bad guy and we go find new source of food. You go kill evil flump. Like, I know I'm probably just, I'm trivial. I'm trying not to laugh because these things are so funny. I love them. I love these little guys. They are not bad. You obviously you're not gonna really want to kill them because they're not that dangerous. And the fact is that you could like legitimately have a whole big family of flumps take down something like maybe a fucking dragon or something if there was enough of them and they felt threatened enough. But you're right. And I'm sorry, I'm laughing my ass off just thinking about all the things that the flumps can do. I'm trying so hard to be mature about it. I can't. I just fucking can't. Because these things are just like they're charming and they're not as iconic as the ooze. I know not a lot of people run them, but they have received a lot of love in outside media as well. I think they were in the Dungeons and Dragons movie.
Yeah, and the thing is that they are so funny and you're laughing and giggling along with them until an adventurer comes along and goes, I know why you're here. You're not good to have around. And then everyone goes, wait, what do you mean?
There's probably a nest of mind flayers somewhere nearby, or a Githyanki, or an Aboleth, or something bad. And they're like, oh yeah, oh you mean the big bad guy that's underneath us? Yeah, would you like to know how to kill it? They're like fucking mind parasites, but not. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm dying over here.
Of course, they are the definition of, oh, that's really silly and funny. Look behind the curtain, and now I'm scarred for life.
Yeah, and sometimes you just need an enemy that can do that, and they're not even enemies. They're just there. The poor little guys are just there, but goddamn, are they not fun as hell to play with?
Oh yeah.
All right, so I think that's all, and that is each of our five favorite characters from the base Monster Manual. I gotta admit, when you break down all of our reasonings, a lot of them were a lot more interesting than I thought. Like the Lamia, the Pseudo Dragon. These are things I would definitely probably run in a campaign at one point.
Yeah, and people don't give the original Monster Manual enough credit because even though it did a not so great job of toning down the complexities of 4E, it still gave us monsters that we look to be like, okay, these are standard setters for silly, for fun, for terrifying, for epic. They set the standard for the next 10 years, and you have to give some respect to that.
And not only that, I hope that some of these guys end up in the new version, because we are getting close to that. I don't know if there even been some. I don't know if we'll see stuff like the Flump. I don't know if we'll see stuff like the Pseudo Dragon or the Yakalo, or maybe even something like maybe the Zorn or the Helmed Horror. I know I'm picking mine, but like, you know, there is a chance. And if they are there, I love to see what new things they come up with for them. And I also hope that maybe they add some new features that maybe they weren't thinking of originally. It's a good idea to see where we could go with stuff in the future, and I'm all for it. And I'm excited to see what we do when the 2025 version comes out next month. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm crossing my fingers that Wizards of the Coast doesn't fuck up. I'm really crossing my fingers. I hope to God they don't fuck up.
And just so that we have a proper comparison, up until the release, every single week we'll be comparing a third-party compendium that has been highly rated,
including stuff like Monsters in the Multiverse, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Xanathar's Guide of Everything, and of course the Book of Many Things, and And then, obviously, we're going to have to look at the new one when it comes out. So we're going to have our plates full until then, and then we will be coming up with some new topics after that. All right, folks. This has been our first episode of Forgotten Table Tales. I have to admit, just from a personal standpoint, this has been something I look forward to, and I can't wait till we do this again next week. I am not even kidding. This has been a lot of fun. We're going to end it here, folks. You all have a wonderful night. I thank you all for your time. We will be posting this on YouTube in next week. So till then, you take care, everybody, and you have a wonderful night. I love you all, and thank you so much to Chitter, my co-host. We will be coming up with some new stuff next time.